My name's Nick Badminton. I'm a Brit. I live in Toronto in Canada, so I'm also Canadian. Strange hybrid mix. I feel like I've had a Canadian upgrade, and I come down and work in the States, so I'm on my way to a US upgrade as well. So I've spent the last sort of 30 plus years sort of working in a number of different fields, everything from telecommunications billing, exciting, through to advertising, very exciting. And now for the last 15 or so years, I've been focused on looking out 5, 10, 20 plus years and helping teams and executives, governments look out a little bit further to try and prepare for what comes next. And that's kind of what this keynote is all about. This is called Facing Our Futures because there are multiple futures ahead of us. We can't exactly tell what they are. This keynote's not about predictions. Things that I talk about in this are speculations on what might come next. So we're going to go into a number of things that I think are really relevant for the pricing community. And I've been learning lots and lots about that from chatting to Patrick and a number of other people in preparation for this. And I got to chat to a lot of people last night. Thank you very much for your insights. But really what I'm doing is just trying to ignite some imagination and get you thinking about what comes next. And my journey started when I was really, really young. This book, The Osborne Book of the Future, was given to me by my father when I was 8 years old, 1979. And in this book was a cavalcade of technologies about how the world might be, the smart home of the future, wearable computing. Some of the things actually exist today. Many of the things don't. I mean, the book was saying we were going to live under the ocean, we were going to live on Mars, we were going to have flying cars everywhere, robots were going to be in every home, right? We like to really wonder, because of all the technological advantage and opportunity, that something drastically different is going to exist. But the world shifts and changes at a slow pace. So thinking about what comes next is incredibly important. But I think more than anything else, I talk about hope. Because we're going to move from hype to hope, because hope is an energy for change, a hope for a better world in the future, and hope that we can make a change today. I'm actually just writing a new book called Hope Engineering. Because as a futurist, I call myself a hope engineer. We're creating new possible futures that are going to be better for the whole of humanity. And that's really what we're aiming towards. Now, I do this, and I work with my think tank as well, for clients all over the world, everyone from the White House to people over in South Africa and to big companies like Disney, just like Patrick said. And what we do is pretty simple. And I invite you to start doing this work today. And at the end of the keynote, there's some takeaways that you can refer to online, and you can start assuming the role of a futurist alongside the jobs that you do in the companies that you work for. There's 4 things. So the first thing I do is I scan for signals. These are indicative things that are happening in the world. It might be something in academia, might be a work of fiction, it might be a news event, it might be some brand new technology or a new cultural shift. And you collect thousands of these. I've collected tens of thousands of signals over the years. And in my brain, they mash together. And when you start mashing them together and colliding them, they create trends. And these are trajectories of change going forward. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes neutral. But change is inevitable. We either change or change happens to us. And the trends show us where we're going. They're both incredibly valuable levels of insight for organizations to have. But what really happens at a future state? Well, the third part of this is around scenarios. What if in the year 2042 we see these people, these places, these things, these cultural differences, these effects happen, these speculative products that could exist in our futures? What happens in that dynamic? But understanding the dynamic is incredibly valuable from a business perspective. Understanding what can happen to our business, what can happen with regarding to pricing and the way that the world dynamically works at a macro level and a micro level within your industry. But the fourth part, I think, is the most important part. It's the most fun part of what I do with my teams and clients is we build stories. I write science fiction for a living, which I'm blessed to do. It's incredible to sit down and wonder, not only the dynamics, but the stories of the people within the dynamics. Because once we can tell a story about the future, much like watching a movie, much like reading a book, we can feel what that future is like. And when you can feel what a future is like, it starts to feel very real. Whereas oftentimes we feel that, imagine yourself in the year 2040, you're looking at a stranger. A story takes you there and puts you in that place. So when we think about signals and trends, and we think about scenarios, we think about stories, this is a modern corporate capability. It's actually been found that companies that undertake this level of exploration and vigilance about a future state, so they can prepare for what comes next, they're more profitable, they've got a higher rate of growth, and they've got larger market capitalization. There are studies about this. So this is when executives' ears prick up, and they're like, okay, we're listening. But really, more than anything else, it's about a mindset shift. And what I try and do is say, we're here to ignite our imagination. How many people, daydream at work? Don't have to admit. Okay, there's some people. But really, there's something very valuable to that. Once we start to do the signal scanning, looking at the trends, understanding the stories and the scenarios, we can start to build anticipatory capabilities. What if the world changes? What are our plans of action? And whilst they might be speculative, even exploring it in a small way helps you prepare a lot better than not paying attention to what might come next at all. But most importantly, I think it's about deepening a level of empathy of the people in our organizations, our clients, the markets, the wider world, humanity as a whole, and the natural world, and really understanding the feelings and the impacts and the effects of what we do within that world. So imagination, anticipation, empathy, 3 parts of futures thinking. There's a mindset shift. And when I started thinking about pricing, and I started reading tons of papers and books and going into it, and leaning on some very brief experience that I have with billing and rating and telecommunications and doing analytics and behavioral models and a whole bunch of stuff that I did for years, running large teams and working with pricing teams in companies like British Airways, I started to realize that there's a Venn diagram, that the pricing folks aren't so different from futures folks, right? So you've already understanding what goes on in your organization. You're using the hard data, you're modeling, you're really working things out. And what you're doing is that you're navigating a complex situation, you're scanning across the data that you have for new patterns and behaviors, and out into the wider world. You're kind of speculating what comes next, but then you're running models to qualify hypotheses. And you're trying to decode some uncertainty and some of the unknowns that are out there in the world. Now, none of this is a perfect science, but when we have rigor and vigilance as well, you start to build a very strong corporate capability. So sure, you can carry on pricing on your own with all of these capabilities. You upgrade that with futures thinking, you're starting to really have a holistic view of the next 5, 10, 20 plus years. So that's where the value really comes. And as I started to dig into this keynote, I'm going to take you on a bit of a ride through a number of different industries, a number of different areas that I think are really interesting and important to pay attention to. But I'm going to start off with a story about the value of futures work and how it's a long game. Does anyone know who Douglas Engelbart is? So I've chatted to tens of thousands of people, and I think 2 people in total know who Douglas Engelbart is. Well, Douglas Engelbart was an electrical engineer. He left the Navy after the Second World War, and he started reading about this new form of mechanics and computational theory and how computers could be actually used to augment our human capabilities. Seems quite normal these days. But in the 50s and the early 60s, it wasn't normal to start thinking that we would all have computers, right? And we would be using these as tools every single day. Well, Douglas Engelbart managed to get a grant in the early 1960s. By 1968, he was ready to give a demonstration in San Francisco to 2,000 people. And this is a short clip of something that's become known as the mother of all demos. And you can see this online on YouTube. And basically, Douglas Engelbart and his team, they invented the touchpad, the mouse, desktop publishing, early versions of interconnected computers using the ARPANET, so early versions of the internet. They had to actually build microwave transmitters for the data to run the demonstration from Stanford to downtown San Francisco. So they invented that. They invented video conference. They invented every single part of modern personal computing infrastructure in 1968. It didn't work particularly reliably. It was called the online system. It was kind of held together with hope and faith as much as it was with wires, right? But what was really interesting, very charismatic man, Doug Engelbart, was that he showed how human augmentation was a real capability that we could lean into. And people were starting to say, okay, microchips are getting more powerful, they're getting smaller, we're going to be able to really understand that there's a trajectory forward. Now, 2,000 people stood up, rapturous applause, that's amazing. And then they went back to their jobs, doing mathematics and computing by paper, punch cards, right? And what was interesting was they went away and they didn't really think much of it. But some people in the audience were from Xerox PARC. It's a Palo Alto Research Center. And over the years, they took some of those ideas and some of the people jumped ship into that team from Douglas Engelbart's team, and they came up with this. This is the Xerox Alto. They produced quite a few of these as well. These are personal computers. They cost quite a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars. Right? In today's money, hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. And it evolved the ideas of graphical user interface, object-oriented programming, and a number of other aspects as well. And they started giving demonstrations. The people in Xerox, they were kind of excited, but they were like, you know what? Our core business is selling copiers and printers. The future is copiers and printers. Great. Personal computing, I can't understand if businesses are even going to have a computer, let alone homes. And there was a lot of narrative in Silicon Valley saying that no home will have a computer and whatever, and that changed over time. And what happened was they gave a number of demonstrations, and one day a development team from a brand new startup in Silicon Valley sat down with the team at Xerox PARC. And they saw something very interesting, and they said, we got to go and tell our boss. Can we bring our boss back tomorrow? So they went and they got their boss, and they all walked in, and Steve Jobs sat down. And this is what he said about the demonstration he saw of the Xerox Alto.
What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this.
So Douglas Engelbart was a futurist, so was his team. People at Xerox PARC were futurists, and they were creating something that they thought was going to be impactful and significant. And then you saw someone, Steve Jobs, that really saw something special. And the graphical user interface and the capabilities to him were an indication and a signal that the future was going to be different, and this was the way. And we still use a lot of these systems today, right? So he cut a check to the Xerox board for 100,000 shares. So can I use this technology? They're like, sure. We're not that interested. Then 40 years ago, after several years of extra development, because it's hard, it's technology, and how do we make this work from a material sourcing perspective, from a build perspective, from a programming perspective. So 40 years ago, during the Super Bowl, Apple were ready to announce the Macintosh. A name synonymous with Apple today, but brand new back then. So Steve Jobs not only did the scanning and saw the trends, and he was a trendsetter, he could understand the dynamics of how the system was going to work. And then he wanted to tell a story about a future state that was different from where we were today. So he hired Ridley Scott, who'd just made Blade Runner, and this is what they did.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of very contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So storytelling, really compelling, really drew people in. A lot of you may have already seen that ad before. Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott didn't even use computers. He didn't see the point. He wrote everything down. He wrote his scripts on paper, right? He soon changed his tone in the next few years. Some people say that adds about Steve Jobs telling IBM to get lost, make way for a new player. What's the importance about this story? The market cap of Xerox. It's $2 billion today. The market cap of Apple is $2.5+ trillion. Futures is a long game. The signals are there very early to show us that there's a new possibility. With fortitude, we can make that world a reality. But along the way, even people like Steve Jobs kept seeing what the market was doing. Apple's one of the greatest second movers, right? And what he imagined was futures, plurality. Everyone's got a different role to play in the world with their computers and their platforms. Everyone's got a different capability, provide a platform for play. So it's fantastic to think about futures as that capability in an organization. I tell that story because it really shows us from a monetary perspective, in the long view, the winners and losers in a way. Okay, let's think about the big macro trends, the global mega trends that are changing the dynamics of our world. I talk a little bit about economic shifts. So by about 2030, 2035, we're going to see this as the pecking order of the world. China, US, India, Indonesia, and Germany. And what's interesting about this in terms of economic power is that there's a shift. Hugely populous areas like China and India. Indonesia as well. Indonesia is actually in Southeast Asia. Watch that country. In terms of agricultural production, technological capability and advantage, huge populations that are ready to shift and move. And Germany being the stalwart of the European Union, right? Some people are actually saying that it's going to herald a new shift in thinking about global trade and global currency. And one of the signals that I look at is around central banking digital currencies. This isn't cryptocurrency. This is the idea that you can have a central bank actually deploying a digital currency that's got a number of different elements to it. Everything from programmability and trackability through to very quick trading across borders and the such like. And what we're seeing is about 130 countries around the world, represent about 98% of global GDP, are starting projects to look at this. For example, the US are looking at projects for transferring cash cross-border using this kind of technology. And there's a lot of pushback, right? Because China's at right the other end. They want full surveillance-based technologies behind their CBDC and their social credit score and programmable currency, and it's a little bit much, right? But it's really interesting to see. And some are saying that maybe we're going to be in a world where global trade will be digital and that there will be 3 reserve currencies: the US dollar, the digital yuan, and the digital euro. That generally makes bankers feel uncomfortable when I say that. But it's interesting to see this already starting to work. Then I think when I think about population shifts and growth around the world, we can't ignore Africa. By 2100, there'll be 4.2 billion Africans. Lagos, Nigeria is going to be 55 million people by 2050. It'll be 88 million people by 2100. Can you imagine the dynamics and the trade, the entrepreneurial brilliance that will come from these places? I mean, how many people we work with already in Africa maybe, but how many people we're going to be working with and the companies that we're going to be working with to source products or to sell to or whatever. We have to mention climate change. It's no longer about who caused it. It's all about, the world is getting warmer. This is the warming stripes from the University of Reading. To my right, on this side, this is 1850. These slices are average temperatures per year. This is 2022. We're getting warmer. It's getting weirder. Things, year by year, are getting more desperate in certain parts of the world in terms of heat, in terms of weather systems being unpredictable and catastrophic. So we have to really bear in mind how that's going to affect a whole number of things, from logistics and supply chain through to materials that we need for our businesses and who we sell to, where they're going to be located as well. I mentioned Indonesia earlier. They just had to move their capital because their capital city was sinking, right? But one of the biggest dynamics that I've been speaking about for well over 10 years is around the water, energy, food nexus. So resiliency across these three areas is going to be vitally important for the countries in which we live. New businesses are going to spring up that really help us develop solutions that create resiliency around water resiliency, because there's more scarcity of water in the world, right? We just can't use water and think that it's just going to be there forever. And that's actually affecting a huge amount of electricity generation, and about a third of the world's food supply is going to be affected by scarcity of water as well. So all of the systems within these three areas of water, energy, and food are going to be rethought. There's going to be innovations, there's going to be changes. These are all going to affect pricing globally in a number of different factors as well. Price of living, how you produce products in your business, and the such like. So it's incredibly important to understand these. It's also important to understand that we're sort of shifting from our fossil fuel age industrial complex to a world where we're headed in towards renewable energy. So solar, wind, waves, hydro, biomass, geothermal is a huge opportunity as well. And what's really interesting, I was just doing some research this morning, the energy from a single year of sunshine exceeds all known energy reserves of oil, gas, coal, and uranium put together. We just have to have the infrastructure to be able to capture that, maybe store it, and then distribute that as well. We don't just flick a switch and then suddenly the world changes, right? But the world is getting really interesting from this perspective. Whatever you call a transitionary plan, Green New Deal or whatever, it's not really about that. It's about creating a better economy that's more stable, that's renewable as well. It's actually cheaper to run an economy on renewable energies. But, there's real struggles. We still need to dig a lot of minerals and a lot of metals out of the ground to be able to make this happen. By 2030, 2035, all of these things in red here, cobalt, graphite, gallium, platinum, all these things that we need for energy transmission lines, for solar panels, whatever, are going to be in short supply. So we have to work out what we're doing in terms of mining and mining exploration and what's going to happen with that. The future is by no means certain. But we know what a hopeful future could look like, and we know that we have to make investments, and we have to maybe start leaning into this as well. And this is going to affect not only the energy systems and the water systems and the food systems, it's going to affect the business systems that we operate as well. But batteries are becoming more prevalent. We're going to double 6 times between now and 2030 in terms of battery capacity around the world. More and more people are investing in that. And what's really interesting is that we're aiming towards a world in 2060, 2070 or so, I speculate, the Internet of Energy. The idea that there'll be hubs around the world generating energy, storing it, and then releasing it when it's needed. You pay for the transmission of energy and the receiving of energy rather than the extraction of it, because extraction won't be there. And this is already happening in Asia across 5 countries. It's happening across the Northern Atlantic and in Europe and the Nordics as well. It's happening on the eastern border of Canada. And it's really interesting. Can you imagine the geopolitical uprising that comes from being able to switch off energy from continent to continent? With the Ukraine conflict, the Ukraine war, we saw Putin turn off the gas to Eastern Europe and Germany, right? That was a lot more difficult than flicking a switch. I know it's not that easy when you're talking about large energy ecosystems, but it's a lot easier to be able to start controlling geopolitical dynamics. Who's going to be the partners in the future for us in North America? And who's going to be the partners for other people around the world? We do have to realize that with the shortage of minerals and also the capability of producing some of the world's most powerful microchips that we rely on for our processing, like 94, 95% of them are produced in Taiwan. We're trying to redress that balance. Back in the day, Silicon Valley decided to outsource everything in terms of the production of silicon chips, right? So we have to understand that there's going to be geopolitical dynamics around that. And we also have to understand that we're living in a world that's getting older. If you think that you're going to retire at the age of 65, you might find that you'll be retiring at the age of 70 or so. I was reading an article today about Japan. Their social support infrastructure and social security is really under a huge amount of duress because people are living older and older and older into their 80s, 90s, and maybe even older than that. And young people aren't having kids, right? But it's interesting to think that by 2100, the number of people aged 65 and above will be 5 times higher than the number of children under the age of 5. It'd be about 3 to 1, 2 to 1 by 2050, right? So what if we anticipate the effects of the industrial evolution, right? We're kind of at this juncture. There's lots of hard conversations to be had and lots of very progressive decisions to be made. It's not going to be a quick transition, but it's going to be something that's going to be slow and steady, and suddenly the world's different. Okay. Contractually, I have to talk about artificial intelligence in every keynote that I give. I've actually been at university. I was really enamored with the idea of machine learning and single-layer neural networks and language. So that's what I studied. I did applied psychology, computing, artificial intelligence, linguistics. Kind of feels very relevant today. I feel vindicated. But it's interesting that all the way back in the 90s, we didn't really see much happen until the 2000s, the 90s, the 2000s, and here we are today. Everyone's talking about that augmented capability, much like Doug Engelbart did all those years ago. And when I talk about data and I talk about the use of data, I use a fairly traditional model when I talk about this. We gather data. I don't underestimate how horrible that is and difficult, right? And where the data lives in 1 million spreadsheets and databases and all over our organizations. Then, as smart people, we turn that into useful information, and then that becomes knowledge. That knowledge we then apply within the context of pricing. Obviously, that's incredibly valuable in an organization. But what I think is more valuable than just knowledge is wisdom, and I think that conferences like this and the coming together of people in the field and the sharing of knowledge shows us that wisdom is incredibly powerful because we share the stories of what we've done and how to do it. And the whole industry itself gets better and better over time. And once we start to gain a capability about making this happen across our organizations, in a wisdom economy, we can start to make real-time decisions a lot better, right? We've probably spent most money in our organizations just on, the data information knowledge cycle over the past sort of 30 or 40 years. But what's interesting is, as we look ahead, we're going to produce more data. It's about 60% year-on-year growth. So we're going to have 1,000 times more data by 2050, about 50,000 zettabytes created every year. We're not going to capture all of that data. Some of that's going to be out in the ether and flying around, real-time processing of networks, of autonomous vehicles or whatever, right? But we're going to be capturing more data than ever, and we're going to be able to use things like machine learning to really delve into that and find patterns that are incredibly valuable for us, and to really up-level how we do pricing and thinking about that as a discipline as a whole. But when I think about AI, I think about different capabilities. I was driving a Tesla last week. I had a rental car. It did not have fully automated, full self-driving capabilities. But I think that this is interesting as an example of what artificial intelligence systems can do. Using sensors and sensor fusion, capturing data, making real-time decisions. Notice how it's driving down very empty roads. It's not quite working perfectly yet. People are still dying from self-driving vehicles, right? Mostly the drivers, because people put a lot of faith in technology. But it's a wonder that this is out on the roads and being tested, and we're using this level of processing of terabytes of information per second. Here, we have a company from Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada, my friends run, called Sanctuary AI. They've gotten a huge amount of accolades. They're getting a lot of money from a lot of companies. People like Accenture are really going deep on this. And what they've done is they've created a robot called Phoenix that can basically do a lot of menial tasks and really difficult tasks, like sorting cups, putting things in bags, and the such like. And what's really interesting about this is that it's not learning on its own. In another room, you've got a human in a robot suit looking through the eyes of the robot and teaching it how to do things with motor skills. Something called Moravec's paradox. If you can algorithmically encode something, then it's relatively easy to do. If you then want to teach it to do something with motor skills, it's incredibly hard to do as well. So robots aren't going to be here in every single context around the world that we live in, home and work and on the streets, for quite some time. They're certainly not going to look like these robots, but we're certainly going to have systems like Tesla's full self-driving showing us a new capability. But when I start thinking about machine learning, I start thinking about AI as a whole. agriculture is using it to help augment the capabilities of agronomists to fly over fields, to work out, how to use their investments around fertilizer and soil health and the such like. I speak a lot to people in the agricultural industry. You've got companies that are rethinking the whole solution around automation and construction. Down in Australia, a company called Hadrian X not only redesigned the system to build houses quickly, about 2,000 bricks per hour, but they redesigned the brick. So there's an important lesson here as well when we start to think about these transformative capabilities, is that we don't just say, install system, world gets better, right? Because new technology and old process is painful old process, right? So new process, new technology, new thinking, new strategic ways of framing what happens next. And I think one of the biggest advancements with machine learning is in the medical field. I mean, Google DeepMind's doing a lot around retinal scanning and predicting disease and a number of different things. I'm absolutely in awe with these people. And it's really interesting, the use of machine learning, we know, within pricing is very much down in the weeds of the data and looking for patterns and, really trying to accelerate our knowledge. But it's out in the real world. And this is where the acceleration comes in thousands of ways in our economy. In addition to artificial intelligence, contractually, I have to talk about generative AI. It's wild, isn't it? 100 million users in 60 days. Who uses it at work? It's really interesting. I'm kind of excited to see, lots of people using it at work. Who knows where their data is after they've put it in the system? Discuss, right? The interesting thing about generative AI is there's lots of players out there. I'm sure some of these don't exist anymore. But from a couple of years ago, there's a market map. It literally sprung up suddenly wherever. I use it for doing some scenario analysis and whatever. It's interesting. Gemini from Google actually has got the biggest sense of humor, so I use them generally a little bit more. But it's interesting how all these systems, a lot of these have been built on OpenAI and capabilities. And what we've got is this world that we think is going to be easier because of this sort of unicorn technology is changing the world. When I grow up, I want to be a prompt engineer for the AI that does my dream job. I remember a couple of years ago, it's like prompt engineers getting paid $300,000. I've never met anyone that gets paid $300,000 being a prompt engineer. I've met people that utilize technology in a whole new way to augment their practices, to really upgrade what they do and to use them, with a really, really critical eye on what they're getting and to work out what it's saying, why it's saying it, and what comes next. There's a lot that's being realized. Boston Consulting Group, they did a study and they said, okay, consultants use this LLM and this GPT and undertake a number of tasks. They finished tasks more quickly, they did more on average, and they produced a higher quality results, which makes me wonder, what are consultants doing? I'm an ex-management consultant, I can say things like that. But on the flip side of this, yes, productivity, great. Uniform output can reduce a group's diversity of thought by 41%. Is now the time for lesser diversity of thinking in our organization? It's not. So there are warnings with this. I'm still bullish on the technology. I still think it's going to do great things, and I know that it's coming in the products that we all use. I just think that we need to be careful. We have to really understand how that fits into an overall suite of tools that we use, because there is value there. The hype has been insane, right? And it costs a lot of money to build these systems. In fact, if you were going to build your own LLM, you could potentially spend millions of dollars collecting and formatting training data, probably the majority of the money that you're going to spend, validating, test and training data, uploading that, implementing that, iterative process, continual operational systems using LLMs, right? What does that do for your business from a sustainability perspective? Well, if you actually look at some of the sustainability targets and what's actually happening around the world with computing processing, we actually see that Microsoft are using an additional 1.7 billion gallons year on year, about 30% year on year, and 20% year on year from Google as well, just processing data using the artificial intelligence platforms that they run. Sounds like good business, but it's like where are they getting the water to cool down those centers? There's bigger questions as well. So when we step in and think we can do this, we can build this, sure. I think we're going to head from a world of large language models to small language models to things that are very atomic and useful, right? Back in the day, you'd build SAS models, and you'd spin them out, and there'd be some stressed out guy in the corner that I'd be calling on. Hey, Doug. What? It's a Sunday. Well, you know, churn in telecommunications or whatever, right? And there's a bit of a warning. You know, all this technology is fantastic. And I always state a little bit of a warning by telling a story. This story is about a guy called Simon Verkart. He's an art activist that lives in Berlin. So Simon Verkart, he played on the idea that we had such a reliance on technology that suddenly we're sort of asleep at the wheel, literally. What he did was he realized how addicted people are to GPS applications, you know, Google Maps and whatever. Who uses Waze or Google Maps to drive, right? So what he did was he got a little red wagon, and he filled it with 99 smartphones. He begged and borrowed and rented some, and he turned them all on, connected them to the network, turned them all on to Google Maps, and he slowly walked across the Bridge of the Spree in Berlin one Wednesday afternoon when traffic was supposed to be normal in Berlin. So as he walked across, you know, very much like this, and there's video of this. There's no cars. There's barely any bikes. And there's a lot of people walking down the street being very confused. Meanwhile, in other parts of Berlin, there were traffic jams in places there weren't supposed to be traffic jams, and reports of this big snarl up over the Bridge of the Spree. No, it was Simon Verkart just really proving a point that if we cognitively outsource our capabilities to these programs and these platforms, we are literally just following instructions from something that doesn't truly understand the context and sensibilities of the world, right? How many times have people ignored Waze or Google Maps and regretted it as well? Here's the dilemma. Anxiety is a second order of effect of using technology, right? My wife, I'm like, I don't believe Waze. She was like, don't. I'm like, but I want it. No, I'm going to turn it off. I don't turn it off anymore. Jan LeCun from Meta said something I think is incredibly interesting. You know, before we can get to godlike AI, we need to get through dog-like AI. You know, we're kind of at a capability. Let's use it. Let's be real about what it is. Let's not necessarily listen to the hypesters. But let's understand that we are headed towards a world where this is going to be a potential reality, that it's going to be a lot easier to gather and process data and put that into a format that we can use more easily, more quickly. Then information is a lot easier. And we can spend most of our time, instead of doing the grunt work, working on knowledge and wisdom. What does that do to the economy? What does that do to your business? What does that do to pricing as a capability as a whole, right? Becomes much more of a board-level concern, I feel. Becomes an actual living capability that people can see real value in real time. And then went with computing. I've been following quantum computing for a long time. It's interesting as a market. It's really gaining a lot of acceleration. And, you know, a huge amount of investment, over 37% investment growth by 2028. So we're starting to see some real benefits of using quantum computing and what Boston Consulting Group also calls quantum advantage. So using quantum advantage to do a number of different things, from drug discovery to logistics to finance, anti-fraud, and whatever. We're starting to see these things being real. When I started having these conversations with the Institute of Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo, my friend Michele Mosca was like, oh, you know, 30 years' time, we're going to have a usable quantum computer with some kind of application. You know, some 8 years later, here we are, and we're starting to see things like, you know, market simulation, portfolio optimization, search ads optimization. Things that are related to what we do in pricing in a number of different aspects across a number of different industries as well. And there are more capabilities coming online. I'm not saying go and buy and build a quantum computer, but you can rent time on computers. You can start hiring these people that, you know, quantum physicists and people that really understand how to program and make these systems work to start exploring whole new ways of optimization within your organization, and the preparation of data is going to be another capability, I'm pretty sure of that. So what if advanced data science becomes a board concern? And when I was chatting to the PriceFX team, it was like, when's this going to get out of the back room where we are, and when's this going to be spoken about regularly at a very senior level in organizations? I think we're right on that cusp. So there's lots of different industries in the room, and I chatted to a few yesterday. So disrupt or distract, there's lots of signals. So I like to do a bit of a quick fire, like pairs of signals. Are these disruptors or distractors, right? The first one, Hyperloop. Who thinks that the Hyperloop is going to be a reality? It's been spoken about in terms of vacuum-based train tubes since the 1880s. Isambard Kingdom Brunel in the UK was coming up with all sorts of patents. Flying vehicles, flying cars, yeah, some people. What's interesting is I did a study last year with a large engineering company and a conglomerate of people that built these AAVs and cities and whatever. It's like, tell us that this is coming. And I couldn't, in good faith, say that it was true in terms of it being a replacement for commuting for normal folks. Will it potentially take people from downtown Chicago to the airport? Occasionally, yes. We kind of see helicopters do that. Would it be cheaper potentially? These are still expensive machines. Would it be used for emergency services? Yes. If you were going to replace all of the people in an 8-lane highway, you'd need 1,400 of these in the air at any one point in time. Are we likely to see 1,400 of them in the air above our cities? Unlikely. But places like England have got drone highways and a whole number of things starting to come up. So the signals are there that probably these are going to come into the world in some form. In some areas where there's no protests about building whacking great big pipes across the country, we might see this happening as well. Potentially in the Middle East, where it's going to be so hot that you can't fly planes, and the quickest way across the country is going to be in these hyperfast trains. We're already seeing this happen in China in different kinds of maglev trains and Japan as well. Okay, electrification of the vehicles that we drive. Who drives an electric vehicle in the room? Yeah, quite a few people. I've been driving electric for about 7 years. What's interesting is Norway, some signals, Norway, 94% of all new vehicles that were sold in the last 6 months were actually fully electric. They've got a lot of policies in place, a lot of incentives to do that. A lot of their infrastructure is there. Another really compelling signal, very weak signal, is Ethiopia is now refusing to import any internal combustion engine vehicles into Ethiopia. Why? Not only because of pollution, but because it costs Ethiopia a lot of money to import fuel. So watch places like Ethiopia and watch places like Norway. It's interesting. But also, it's interesting in terms of innovation. There are companies that are coming out, like people like Toyota, that are coming out with new kinds of fuel, hydrogen and different fuels as well, clean fuels. So the world's not going to be one whole solution one way, one whole solution another way. For an industrial perspective, this is really interesting to me. I did a radio interview a couple of days ago. There are container ships that now use wind power and sails to sail across the ocean, delivering cargo. Not only is it cheaper, it's still quick, but it uses a natural resource, which is the wind. So energy is going to be super interesting. The electrification of the world is going to be interesting as well. Food is really interesting as well, and this is a true story. This is a chicken called Ian. Ian is retired and lives in Southern California. He works for a company called Just. And Just, you might have seen on some of the shelves, they do Just eggs and a number of different things. But they've taken some cells from Ian and they produce chicken. Now, a lot of the modern cellular meat that's being produced today is in large vats. It's quite sludge-like, and that's why we're not seeing it on the shelves because, oh, I'm just going to buy some chicken sludge for dinner. Is that cool? But it's going to get there, right? And it's really interesting when we start to think about these systems and how we need to change in terms of food production, the deficit of protein around the world. The protein market is going to be $7 trillion by 2050. Say this technology just disrupts 0.5% of that market. That's a lot of bread, right? Or chicken. Then vertical farms, talking about mega cities like Lagos, Nigeria, a lot of other large cities that are growing, we're going to be having more vertical farms on the outskirts of our cities, on the roofs of our cities. We're going to have robotics doing that in automated ways. These are technologies that are on the cusp of really revolutionizing our food systems as well. When I think about waste, which is a cultural artifact of our industrial revolutions of the last 300 years, I like to remind myself that the total mass of plastics buried in landfills today is twice the mass of all living mammals. That's a fun stat and doesn't make me feel particularly good, but we live in a world of waste. Waste is a cultural artifact of our industrial revolution. If you just think about, on a daily basis, how much waste you produce. I flew down here on a plane, cans of Coca-Cola, Atlanta, Never Pepsi in Atlanta, right? But the waste, it's astounding. We all try and balance that out at the end of the year. But then we've got packaging, new kinds of packaging, mycelium, mushrooms, that could be produced at scale and grown, and packaging that could change things over time. But we've got an industrial complex that's reliant on plastic, so where do we go next? What do we do? There's going to be a lot of shifts and changes in this area as well. We can't keep burying it under our cities or shipping it off to the Philippines or whatever. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. Then it gets interesting when I start to think about really new technology, wearables like the Apple Vision Pro, and really old technology like psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms. I'm not going to ask who's done them. Has anyone worn an Apple Vision Pro? Has anyone tried Apple Vision? It's pretty amazing, right? High fidelity, spatial computing, incredible. Being used in surgery now, spinal surgery, to help that surgeon with precision make the incisions and do the work. One of the oldest technologies in the world, psychedelics, natural plant-based medicines, have been healing trauma for years, shamanic ritual. But it's also being used in therapy today to heal people's trauma in whole new ways. It's also been explored in terms of solving difficult problems and being used in pure math and a number of different things. There's a guy called Dr. James Fadiman that did tons of research with this and mescaline and a number of things in the 90s. I'm not saying do it. I'm saying it's interesting. And a lot of people have really revolutionized medicine and technology and a number of areas because they applied this kind of old technology. Okay. But then it comes back to where we are in terms of human capability. On the one side, we've got technologies, and we've got it in our pockets, wearing it on our wrists. We're letting our kids use it. I've got a 4-year-old. I have to wrench that iPad from him, and boy, it's hard work. Augmented capabilities, co-pilots that are technologies for us as humans to augment our capability, back to Douglas Engelbart. But there's also a narrative, and there's a lot of exploration about artificial general intelligence. The idea that we can have artificially intelligent systems that are as smart as humans are, replacing us. Don't think it's quite that simple. Are we going to get better processing? Are there going to be systems that potentially are going to be stronger from an artificial intelligence perspective? Yes, but we're not quite there. So industries are changing, but there's something interesting. Amara's law, Roy Amara is a futurist from the Institute of the Future, and he said, in the short term, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology, right? And we might be feeling that we're doing that in this keynote a little bit. But in the long term, we tend to underestimate the impact of technology, right? Blockbuster underestimated the internet. Kodak underestimated the power of digital photography. Toyota is underestimating the power of electric vehicles. That's also controversial. What if we explored a non-zero-sum market of collaboration? What if we all go out to win by not having winners and losers, but by all winning together? Okay, we're in sort of the last 11 minutes or so I'm going to go through this next session fairly quickly. Security and identity, we have to bear this in mind. As we've got these new systems, we have to bear in mind that there are some unknowns around the corner. Black elephants are the things that we know might happen, but we don't know when they're going to happen, like pandemics. We've got black swans as well, which are the things that we've just got no idea. For example, aliens landing. Right? Sometimes these two get mixed up, but talk about black elephants and say, you might not think it's going to happen, but it's likely to happen, and look at the black elephant in the room. What if there was an explosion in the Pentagon? Well, this isn't a real image. This is a Gen AI image. This caused markets to shake the day that was put onto Twitter and that was shared around. It was very quickly debunked, and the Pentagon said, we didn't blow up today. Company in Hong Kong, their CFO called one of their senior execs and said, we need to shift 300 million Hong Kong dollars to these entities because we're doing some new work with this. It's a great new client. And that executive said, okay, but I can't just trust you on a phone call. Can I see you and meet you and to get this done the proper way through the chain of command with signatories? And they were like, yeah, sure. But we're all out of town. Can we do this via Zoom? They did it via Zoom. There was a team of people around the CFO. They had a long conversation, and the executive said, yes, we're good to go, and started transferring money. No people from the CFO or the CFO's team were real. They're all generated by artificial intelligence. So we're in a new world of mischief and misinformation that's coming to really, flip us up. I think it's the same with the data that we use and the people that are maybe injecting that data into large language models, and there's a ton of research around that as well. And really, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, CRINC, are the people that are to blame in most cases with this as well. And the NSA and people like that do an incredible job of keeping us safe from harm. But what if we focus on secure company-wide operations? So as we go into the last part of it, thinking about hope engineering and stories and thinking about what we do with futures, we start to think about, okay, scanning for signals, looking for trends, understanding dynamics through scenarios, and then thinking about stories. I think these are the people that work in pricing in organizations now. Data scientists, developers, executives, philosophers, ethicists, artists, designers, and futurists. This is where we're going in our industry. It's going to become ultimately a creative discipline as we start to really embrace futures work as well. And it's going to be incredibly valuable in an organization. I've used this with companies like Disney, and I said, what if we were going to have Afro Disney in 32 cities across Africa? What does that do to the dynamics of your business? So I built these speculative designs with a friend of mine using Gen AI of what that future might be like. I worked with an airport in Vancouver International Airport, on their master plan for 2037. And they said, how are we going to inspire people to think differently about 20 years' time? I said, can I write science fiction stories? And this is what we put together.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
So we planned 5 meetings. This got such an overwhelming response. We ended up having 16 meetings. It was the largest public engagement they ever did. And they had more ideas coming in about how to revolutionize the capability that they were using. Right? And what was amazing was, over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, things went quiet. And then they went and built something that I designed in a science fiction story with all sorts of augmented screens of whales and whatever. You've got this rotunda. In my science fiction, this was going to be a vertical farm. This is just a glassed-in island forest in Vancouver that you can stand inside and be outside in the airport, right? With a forest. It's incredible. Futures work is about imagination and also making it come to life as well. And my jaw hit the floor when I saw this. So I'm incredibly happy to see this kind of work being embraced. With pricing, I sort of also encourage people that are in investment and family offices and whatever to do speculative portfolios. Why don't you go online and build portfolios of stock purchases that aren't real? We know that there are systems that we can model, what might happen in the markets. Why don't we do that? It's a great tool for futures work, especially if you're looking at really edgy technologies. And I do this a lot to track, all new kinds of fuels and space, exploration, and a whole number of different things. That's an incredibly valuable tool from a future storytelling perspective. But really, futures work doesn't start in the future, it starts now, it starts in the present day. And there are some ways to start thinking about making this happen in your practice. Number 1, question your own history and perspectives. We all come with bias, we all come with beliefs, and we all come with the experience of the years that we've undertaken our tasks. question everything. Look for pockets of future in the present. This keynote has done some of that. But go out there and really start to look at the industry that you're in, the pricing industry as a whole, and those mega trends as well, and start to really gather the signals and start to think about those trends. And be wildly creative and collaborate. You can have a great idea on your own, but you can have better ideas together. So share your futures work that you do, because that's really going to help you in your industry. And really ignite that imagination, build that anticipatory capability, and deepen empathy for every part of your business, the people within it, the people you serve, and the world at large. This is the mindset shift for modern organizations to be more profitable. And really, it's all based on hope. Hope for a better world, and hope to have the energy to make it happen today. Now, I'm going to leave you behind with a couple of things before we have time for a few questions. One, you can scan this, and I'll send a link to the team that they'll share with you afterwards. You can scan this, and it will take you to a page on futurist.com that I run, and that page will tell you, a number of ways to start scanning for signals, the questions to ask around trends, how to think about designing scenarios, how to apply that in your business as well. But I'm also going to set you a 3 days futures challenge as well that's at the beginning of this, which is, go away from today, and as you're traveling home, pick a signal or two, maybe from my keynote or maybe from within your industry, of things that haven't quite happened yet, but there's some new innovations. And think about the impacts and effects on the world. And then pick another and work out what happens when they happen at the same time. What effects and how do they accelerate and how do they change? And then think about those trends for positive, negative, and neutral changes going forward as well. And share those ideas amongst you and your community and your friends, and share this as a resource as well.
Hi, Joe Raz. I'm Train Technologies out of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, great.
10 years ago, 3D printing was a big thing, technology-based.
Yeah.
What's the scoop on that? What's your take on that?
So 10 years ago, everyone was going to have a 3D printer at home, and you'd be able to print all sorts of things. And I've used it myself. I've used it with clients. The industries where 3D printing is really starting to take hold is in construction, it's in aerospace, it's printing metals and alloys and a whole number of different things. It's out there. So what happens is, when you've got these hype bubbles and these hype cycles, it's like everyone can use it. And then what you find is, you find the use cases and the people that can use it for high-value scenarios using it first. And over time, it might seep out into society. Something like 3D printing is very difficult and tricky to do and whatever. And I've sort of played a lot with the technology, certainly 10 years ago, like you were talking about. But it takes up a lot of space, and there are more air fryers that have got more value than 3D printers in the kitchens, right? But so technologies, it's a great example of something that I used to talk about, I don't talk about unless I'm in the context of where it's very, very useful. And that's aerospace, it's in construction, 3D printed concrete buildings, in war zones, and a whole bunch of it. There's some really, really cool stuff. 3D printing drugs, 3D printed supplements. There's a whole number of different areas. It's really cool things are happening. It's just, my mum and dad aren't printing a new doorknob, right? That's not changing, yeah. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. Another question?
Do you have a perspective on the shift in social media going away from platforms like Twitter and X into Mastodon and the Fediverse?
Yeah.
Kind of the federation of social media so that it doesn't belong to just certain companies like Facebook and Twitter,
Sure.
Becomes more social.
So the decentralization of communication platforms and taking back control. I'm on Blue Sky, on Mastodon. I don't want to be on Twitter, X. I don't want to be there, whatever, right? They're all going to live in one big happy family or unhappy family, right? I think platforms like TikTok are the most concerning for me because they're behavioral modification engines. So if your kids are doing TikTok, then worry. They might be making money on it, so that might be good, but be careful there. When we start to think about the democratization of communication and connection, it's everywhere, right? This has been the mantra of people like Mark Zuckerberg and whatever over time, Jack Dorsey. The trouble is you get to a point where you've got to be comfortable with the bad actors and the good actors, and you've got to build this own capability. In Finland, there's a nationwide program for learning to recognize misinformation. This is the point This is the capability which we control, right? Which is our perception, what we read, what we understand to be real. This is where we need to control it. No one's going to build systems to protect us from this. It's like the Pentagon, explosion image. It's like, nah, do I believe that? Qualify. The generative AI CFO, sort of embezzling hundreds of millions of Hong Kong dollars. So we're reaching a level of awareness where misinformation is easier to see. There's been incredible campaigns. Look online for a campaign called Birds Aren't Real. There's a young man that went to a rally, and he went to a rally, he realized there was a lot of misinformation at this rally, and he just wanted to play around. So he created this campaign called Birds Aren't Real. In fact, birds have all been replaced in the 1980s by the US government with drones that surveil all of us. And everyone knows, in the student community really lapped it up, everyone knows that it isn't real. But they all go out there. There's T-shirts and there's protests. Birds aren't real. It's interesting new ways to say, misinformation is obvious. Question everything, do the due diligence or whatever. Look it up. Birds aren't real. Fantastic example. Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. One question down here.
Hi, my name is Javier Vargas with The Bridge. You kind of touched on it, the concept that the things that are out there, you have to question now with all of the AI creating content, right? We trained the AI on the internet.
Yeah.
I'm curious at your perspective. Have we poisoned the well? Like, what's the future of the internet with this?
Ooh, that's a great question. Have we poisoned the well of the internet? Well, it's been poisoned for a long time, my friend. How much time do we spend in data governance and data hygiene? Hands up who loves data hygiene. Yeah, there's always a couple. I used to love data hygiene as well. I was a management consultant. I could sell tons of projects. What's really interesting is that, data is inherent. We produce it, systems produce it. There's bias in all systems. There's bias inherent in every human. We push this out into the world in whatever ways we do, through our actions, through what we publish and whatever. It's accelerating. It's getting more difficult. Now people are realizing that they can poison large language models. For example, there's one example with large language models. I was chatting to a cybersecurity company earlier this year, just outside of the Pentagon, Tyson's Corner, Virginia. And we were speaking about people were injecting code, learning how to code into some of these large open source large language models. And so, wow, this code works. I can just take that. It works perfectly, deploy. But the code actually was very cleverly coded to actually ignite a new vulnerability the next year. So great in 2024, backdoor in 2025. So we're already seeing things like poisoning of large language models and whatever. We're starting to see that out in the world. It's more easy now than ever before to basically take images from wherever and build a story, build a website, publish it out. Someone just tried to do that to mess with some election stuff right now in the States. I was just reading that on the BBC this morning. The well is poisoned. You just got to work out which water you want to drink, right? Thank you very much. Cheers.